My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for being here. Well, I'm an alcoholic. That's my main credential for being here. I've been sober since 24th of July 1993. I've sponsored a few hundred people. I've talked to many hundreds, if not thousands more. Frankly, I think most of the people we sponsor wouldn't call us their sponsors. We don't think of ourselves as their sponsors. But if I take input from someone, that's really what I'm doing. I'm taking sponsorship from them, whether it's a live person, a piece of literature, a tape. Some of the best sponsorship I've had is from tapes. You can't answer back. You can't argue. You just have to do what they say. Now, if you're very, very brave, you can go on Facebook and you can join one of those lovely big book groups on Facebook. If you like an argument, go onto one of those and ask the question, where does it say sponsorship in the big book? It's not in the first 164 pages, and you can have the most almighty argument. If you've got borderline personality disorder, you'll love it. You go in somewhere, ask an innocent question, get your popcorn and just sit back while everyone argues about it. I don't care whether it's in the big book. It helped me. Now, the fact is, it's like forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't technically in there on pages 66 and 67, which are the forgiveness passages. When you look up forgiveness in the or forgive in the Oxford English Dictionary, certainly the Diffusion Dictionary, the lexicon, it says to forgive is to stop being angry. There we go, to stop being angry. And what is page 66 and 67 about? It's about stopping being angry. So the fact the word forgiveness isn't in there is irrelevant. The content, it's the content that matters, not the terminology. The word sponsor is not in there. But unfortunately, the bloke that wrote the book, Bill W., did refer to his sponsor, Ebby. So I'm not a sort of legalistic person when it comes to AA. If you want a legalistic person, I'll give you some names and numbers. There are plenty of them around, and I'm not one of them. So I had sponsors right from the beginning. I've had lots of sponsors over the year. I've got a formal sponsor at the moment, and I've had him as my sponsor for 12 or 13 years. So what is the content of sponsorship? And this is talked about in the big book. So you look at chapter 7 and you've got someone that wants to join AA and follow the process that AA offers. And what is sponsorship for that person? It's presenting adequately what the AA program is. And if they want to go through with it, in other words, if they want to take the step 3 decision and take the subsequent actions, then you're willing to share with them your practical experience and guide them through it. That's the formal side of things. But oh dear, I'm going to get controversial already. Not a moment too soon, I know one or two of you will say. I was brought up in AA with lots of tapes. So Maureen used to send me a tape every week. She used to record it from one tape to another. She would get them and she would make copies for people, put them in little packages, take them to the post office and send them out to people. And I relied on these. This was before the internet and where you had your local meetings. You couldn't go to meetings around the world or access AA from anywhere else. So if your local meetings were rotten, but you had tapes, you were okay. You could hear a message from somewhere else, which is very important. And a number of the tapes I heard in the first year were from members of the Pacific Group in Los Angeles, Brentwood. And in particular, a speaker called Clancy, who talked about a very strong form of sponsorship, which is barking truth at your sponsee. And I have to say, I love all that. I'll tell you why. Over the years, I've had to make, oh, this is where I have to move, because the cleaner chap's coming in, so I need to leave him in peace as much as him me. When I was new in recovery, I couldn't find my arse with both hands. I had an incredibly difficult first 2 years. And I came to AA with zero life skills, zero, no clue about anything. I came from what is a functional family. My family were about as much use as a chocolate teapot. And also, I'm going to swear. If you don't like swearing, put cheese in your ears. But I'm going to swear. I was full of shit when I got sober. I believed all sorts of things which were nonsense, which were not true, and which were not helping me. If I hadn't had people to call me out robustly, I'd be dead, D-E-A-D. People weren't unkind. There's nothing unkind about being direct. If ever you've had to go to accident and emergency, or the emergency room as it's called in America, they're perfectly nice, but they've got a job to do and they get on with the job. They get on with the job quickly. They're not unkind, but they don't sit there patting your damp little hand either. They do what needs to be done. They say what needs to be said, and they go on to the next patient. And this is what my early sponsors were like. I'm wonderful at getting people to pat my damp little hands and tell me it's going to be okay. Tell me how wonderful I am, how much they love me. Oh, I was in a meeting a few days ago where they said, oh, you know, the program works because of love. On one level, that's true, and maybe we'll come to that. But certainly the forms of love that I was exposed to before I came to AA didn't do me the blindest bit of good. They didn't cure my alcoholism at all. I needed someone to understand my position because they'd been in it, help me understand my position, which I was in, and give me a clear path out of it, clear directions about how to get out of it. And that's what people gave me. And when I talked rubbish or was evasive or difficult or resistant, and I was immensely resistant for years, frankly, I didn't become nice. I'm not sure I have yet, but I didn't become nice when I got to AA suddenly. I didn't become particularly compliant with a lot of things. And I really gave people the runaround. And my real models in my early days were Maureen and Sue and Doug. Doug was my formal sponsor. Maureen was about 17 years sober at the time. Sue was around 30 years sober. Her nickname was Angry Sue. This gives you a little bit of insight into, now, I don't think she was angry. I think people experienced her as angry because she challenged them. I've got a friend who lives in Westchester County, where the culture seems to be, if you don't like what someone says, you accuse them of yelling at you. And I think that's what happened with Sue. I remember phoning her up from a telephone box, if anyone remembers what one of those is. Explain that to the children, they'll need that explaining. Telephone box. And it was 10 to 11, and at the time the off licenses in London closed at 11. So I was going to have to make a pretty sharp decision about whether or not I was going to drink that night, because I was very thirsty. And I phoned Sue, and she picked up the phone at 10 to 11. 10 to 11, she picked up the phone, and I said, Sue, I want to drink. And she said, oh, do you? AA's for people who don't want to drink. Click. That was the end of the conversation. Now, I think quickly even then I thought on my feet. And I realized I had to stop playing games. If I wanted a conversation with Sue, I had to stop playing games. It's funny how even in a I was very mentally ill when I got to AA, but the little calculator machine about how to manipulate situations, how to get my own way, was absolutely intact. And I thought to myself, I know what I'll say to Sue. I phoned her up again and I said, I don't want to drink, but I'm frightened I'm going to. And she said, now we're in business. And then we had a real conversation, moving around the office just to try and find the quietest spot. I remember a particular conversation with Maureen where I managed to get her on the phone on Saturday night. That was quite a coup. You know, you're bored, it's Saturday night, you're at home, what do? You phone an old timer and threaten suicide. Pretty effective at getting people on. It gets people's attention, I'll tell you that. And I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to do a step 4. And she said, why not? And I said, because I can communicate effectively only through the means of poetry. And she said, this was Wimbledon housewife, she said, horse shit. You're a communal garden alcoholic, and don't you forget it. This has worked for millions of other people. You are not fundamentally different than the rest. You're conceited, but you're not fundamentally different than the rest. Without that straight talking, I would be dead. I got into the most terrible pickle when I was around 15, 16 years sober, with what we refer to as an Al-Anon slip. An Al-Anon slip is where you get unhealthily entangled with the fate of another alcoholic or addict. And I got enmeshed in all sorts of unhelpful ways. And I found a kindly old timer to, as it were, help me sit with my feelings about this situation for about 3 months. And we talked and we emailed, and there was lots of compassion going back and forth. And eventually I told my sponsor, and my sponsor is fond of saying an honest man or an honest person, an honest alcoholic, is one that eventually tells the truth. And I eventually came clean about my shenanigans. That's a technical term. My shenanigans with this alcoholic who was mid-relapse. And he gave me the most almighty slap about it, gave me very clear instructions about how to extract myself suitably and quickly from this dreadful situation. I followed it, and it was like someone pulling a thorn out of a festering sore. The healing started immediately. The healing was unpleasant, but it started at the point of the slap. And when he gave me the slap, metaphorical slap, when he gave me the slap, I felt that the sky turned black, because it upturned all of my beliefs about the situation and about a lot of other things as well. But I decided to trust him over myself. I decided to trust his perception of the situation over my own perception of the situation, because I was the one who was in trouble. And one of the things my sponsor says is, I'd rather see someone following the mistaken advice of a well-meaning sponsor than their own best thinking. Occasionally people do say idiot things in recovery. It's not often. Occasionally there are damaging things which are said. I'm not going to say they never happen, but I tell you, of all the things I've ever had to make amends for, and there have been many, not one of them flowed from me following my sponsor's instructions. Every single thing I've ever had to make amends for, I came up with myself. I thought up with my own little noodle. I did not need any help to do that. So sponsorship is incredibly important because it's not just having a guide through the 12 steps. It's having someone who's got your back, who knows you inside out, and who's willing to call you out when you're about to die of alcoholism through your own bad decision making. Maureen said trying to talk to people in AA is like trying to talk to people who are skateboarding on the edge of a cliff with ear defenders on, so they can't hear a thing that you're saying. Incredible danger. If you're in recovery and you're not recovered, you're not in a recovered position. I'll tell you what the 7 death threats are. If you have resentment, if there is behavior in your life today which is harming other people, if you have secrets, if you have any amend which is unmade, any creditor which is unfaced, any complacency in your life about recovery, page 85. And then if your life is not built around work and self-sacrifice for others, the book says, if any of those 7 are operative, you're going to drink. It's a matter of when, not if. They use in Fred's story between pages 39 and 43, the idea, they prophesied that at some point the defense would give way. And so those 7 death threats are, they're what I have to live by. I have to make sure that I'm clean on all of those 7 in order to guarantee my continued sobriety. Until that point, and even when that point is reached, until that point, boy, do I need other people. Boy, have I needed other people to watch out for me because I'm unable to watch out for myself. Page 66, resentment cuts me off from the sunlight of the spirit. And I tell you what, all of those other 6 will as well. It's not just resentment which cuts a person off from the sunlight of the spirit. It's one secret is enough to separate me from the rest of humanity. Alcoholism, I'll tell you, if you go to your home group, let's say, especially if it's a physical home group, which has been around for years or has been around for decades. There are lots in London where the group has been around for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. You go to that room and you ask yourself, how many, in my case, because I'm 29, coming up to 29 years sober, how many people in this room are over 29 years sober? Almost none. Yet the room was full of people 29 years ago. Where are they? Mostly dead. Some have moved outside London. That's certainly the case in central London. There's an attrition rate because people leave and go and live in the country. Some people live in other countries. That's fine. But by God, have a lot of the people I've known who I knew in one particular home group in 1993, over the years, one by one, they slipped, most didn't come back. The ones who have stayed, the ones I know from 1993 who are still sober, they're not necessarily clever, they're not necessarily accomplished, they're not necessarily nice. What they are is devoted to AA. What they are is absolutely unswerving adherence to the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything less than that, good luck. This is like a game of last man standing. I got to make sure I'm not in the middle of the AA bed. I've got to make sure I'm at the extremist end of AA, the people that dot the I's and cross the T's, because I don't want to take any chances. Someone I know from that home group in 1993 got to 30 years sober, the age of 60, wasn't really, he was doing lots of super spiritual things, helping lots of people, marvelous meditation classes, but wasn't really doing AA, wasn't sponsoring people. And he had a glass of champagne to celebrate his 60th birthday. Within 6 months, he was begging in the doorways of Soho to get money for crack. This isn't a game. And My friend Devinder says, continuous sobriety doesn't keep you sober. The fact a person has been continuously sober for a period does not guarantee they will remain sober. This is why I'm foolish enough to still have a sponsor at 29 years. And I talk to him on a regular basis and I tell him what is going on. And if I've got a problem, I figure out the best solution I can based on the knowledge I have. And I take the problem and the solution that I figured out to him and say, have I missed anything? Have I got anything wrong? And when he suggests something, I do it on the same basis that I said earlier. When he says, I'd rather see someone follow the bad advice of a well-meaning sponsor than their own best thinking. And I'm still willing to go against my own instinct to follow what he suggests. Not because he's wise, he is wise, but because he's not me. A friend of mine, number of years sober, in a city somewhere. How's that for anonymous? Rather balks at this idea of referring to others for decision making after many years, because does the big book not say we come to rely on our thinking, blah, blah, blah. And one of his lines is very interesting because it bothered me at the time. And then I realized afterwards why. He said, who knows me better than I do? Yeah, a couple of you winced at that. I might know a few things about myself, but my friends know better what the back of my head looks like than I do. I don't know what I look like from behind, not really. If you want to ask what I'm really like, ask my other half. Ask the people I live with. Ask the people I work with. Ask my students. Ask my colleagues. You will get keen insights which somehow my keen mind has missed. So this works because I'm embedded in a network with a sponsor and with other people. I do a quarterly review, which covers my whole life, 360 degrees, looking for all possible character defects. I list out the corrective measures and the sane and sound ideal, and I run it through with a number of people. And all of those people are effectively sponsoring me. I have one named sponsor, but I'm willing to follow the guidance of the group conscience. And it's famous last words, hasn't done me any harm. I've got a great life and I'm sober. What more do you want? Now, the actual nuts and bolts of this, why do I sponsor? Last page of Dr. Bob's Nightmare explains it. I've got a moral obligation to, because how are people supposed to recover in AA without guidance? Someone has to do it, and it has to come from within AA. Secondly, I'm paying back the debt to the people that took time out of their busy lives to help me. Thirdly, I enjoy it. If you're not enjoying sponsoring other people, you're not doing it right. You need to learn how to do it right from people who are enjoying it. It's huge fun. It's challenging, but it's huge fun. And also, it's insurance against a slip. I think there's a fifth reason. He was 4 years sober when he wrote that. I think if he was, longer, he might have added a fifth. I don't know. He might have added a fifth one. The steps get you only, the first 11 steps get you only so far. It's the 12th step that's taught me 95% of what I've needed to learn about myself and my relationships with other people and how to operate in the world. It's sponsorship. Service is great, stacking the proverbial chairs and emptying the proverbial ashtrays, great. Intergroup, area, district, region, all of those things, great. Being a GSR, great. But it's not as high octane. It's not the good stuff. Like, the good stuff is sponsoring. How much time should a person spend sponsoring? Enough that it hurts. I certainly don't work as many hours in my professional life as I would if I didn't have any sponsees. Well, there you go. Something has to give. It's simply how the cookie has crumbled with me. Other people do it differently. but I spend a lot of hours a week sponsoring. I'm also, people ask me, so I generally say yes, although we'll come to the prerequisites. But it boils down to this. If I'm saying to God in the morning, direct my thinking, show me what to do today, and then the phone keeps ringing, help, help, you know, I mean, you're not going to get an engraved invitation from God to say, you know, do this, do that. But people ask, crazy people being comfortable enough to talk to you is actually a pretty good sign. How do you get sponsees? They're hiding them at meetings. All of your potential sponsees are being carefully hidden by AA in the meetings. So you have to go to the meetings and you have to let people see who you are by sharing honestly and openly, not luridly, but honestly and openly about the problem, your understanding of the problem and the solution. And if they like what you have, they'll ask you. The next thing I'm going to say is also controversial. I'm of the view that we broadcast, as it were, on particular frequencies to attract particular people into our experience. And when people are not asking me to help them, I'm doing something wrong. There is something wrong with my spiritual status. I'm not broadcasting properly. My friend Melody, this was back in 1993. Melody was wonderful. I remember 6 months sober, a year sober, a year and a half sober. She was always surrounded with little newcomers like ducklings, clucking away with their Sloane Square accents and their terrible troubles, because they were comfortable with her and they knew she had a solution. She had a real touch with people. She was great. She never had to work to find people. She got her own spiritual status sorted out. She had the willingness to help, a genuine willingness to help other people. It's her number one priority. She took that instruction, be there for other people, to heart, and people just saw it and flocked. It starts from the inside out. When someone asks me to sponsor them, it's very different now than it was when I was new. New people will often, not always, will often do very well with someone that's maybe 6 months ahead, 1 year ahead, 2 years ahead. I was someone who loved people who were 20 years ahead, 30 years ahead. I don't know why, I'm just built like it. Other people are not. They can only relate to people who are only a little bit ahead. There are lots of stories of 12 stepping where, you know, old timer and relative newcomer go and 12 step someone. And the drunk person can't relate to the old timer, but they can relate to the person that's 2 weeks sober or 6 weeks sober or 6 months sober. Today, I tend to redirect new people to someone local, although there are exceptions. And one of the difficulties about talking about sponsorship is it's not a cookie cutter exercise. It's a very, very personal matter. With each person, it's different. With each person that comes to you, it's different. There are lots of repeating patterns, but no one is quite like anyone else. What I do establish, though, is I establish that the person is indeed an alcoholic. If it's other fellowships, because I go to more than one fellowship. Most people come with a kind of portfolio of addictions these days. It's all very professional. You know, they've got their little list, you know, alcohol and food and sexual anorexia, apparently a thing. All of these things that people have got. I don't worry too much about the list because we'll get to that. I make sure there is enough in common that they're going to identify with my experience and I'll be able to get through to them. The reason this is so important, again, end of Dr. Bob's story. He says the reason he clicked with Bill W. is not because he knew stuff as though he'd read it in a book. It's because There are lived experiences. And it was the fact that he instinctively understood that Bill knew what he was talking about. And this is key to step 2. I believed AA would work for me because I could see it worked for you, and I was like you. If I'm not like you, how do I know it's going to work for me? So there's got to be a main addiction in common. I always give people a list of icebreaker questions. You want to find out as much as possible about the person before you agree to say yes. Particularly, now if they're completely new, it's actually pretty straightforward. If they've been around for a while, the reason they're asking you is because it didn't work out with the previous sponsor. And I want to know why. What went wrong? Because whatever went wrong with them will go wrong with you unless it's found out and fixed. I used to jump from sponsor to sponsor because I didn't like what one of them said, so I went and got someone else. And what sponsors have gradually do over time, they figure out what your white whale is. Now, that's an image from the book Moby Dick, which I haven't read, I would add, but it's in the culture, this notion of your sort of nemesis, the Ahab, I think he's called in the book, has got this nemesis, he's a whaler. This nemesis is this great white whale. It's his great enemy. And I think we have white whales, which are our psychological blocks, which we're holding on to as our identities. And sponsors will eventually find out where they are and start playing battleships and cruisers and dropping little bombs in the vicinity of the white whale. And when someone got too close, I stuck my middle finger up and went to the next person. I was in a job I hated when I was 2 years sober. And I said to my sponsor, I can't do this anymore. I hate it. It's horrible. And he said, go and get a new job. Go and do something else. I don't know what I want to do, and I've got to pay my bills, so I have to stay in this job. He said, the universe will provide. And I was so enraged, I put the phone down. I'd never spoke to him again. He was right. It took me another 15 years to discover that was the case. When I was in a job at around 8 years sober, 9 years sober, full of stress, high stakes, awful. And I said to Chris, I said, I need to be in a job which is very challenging and very exciting and interesting because I get bored easily. I need a challenge. And he said, there are greater challenges in life than work. And I was so enraged, I put the phone down and I didn't speak to him for 2 years. So if someone comes to you and they've had one sponsor before, you want to find out what happened. If they've had 4 sponsors before, you really want to ask very carefully. If they say things like, I just want to make sure you're safe because the last 7 sponsors I had weren't safe, back away slowly. If they think they've seen something special in you which understands them the way no one else does, you are the last person that should be talking to them. I ask a lot of questions. I ask about medication, not because I'm a doctor, I'm not. But if they're out of their good on something, you want to know. If they're on antipsychotics, you might want to know so that when they phone up psychotic, you can ask them questions like, are you taking your medication? Have you talked to your psychiatrist in the last 6 months? There are very, very vulnerable people. You need to know what you're dealing with. You need to know how quickly you signpost them to the local mental health services if there's the first sign of trouble. You need to know what you're dealing with. You need to know what addictions they've got, which they're concealing. Most people are concealing some little behavior pattern that they're using to avoid actually facing themselves. Try and get them to reveal that what it is at the beginning. Give them a list. Get them to tick off which things they're up to. All of this is useful information. You can't help someone if you don't know what's going on. People have to be willing to go to any lengths. I had a really bad case of alcoholism. I had to do an awful lot in order to merely stay sober in 1993 and at other times as well. Also mentally ill when I got into recovery. Sorry about the noise, it'll stop in a minute. So my first year, I went to a meeting every day. I spoke to several people every day. I did step work every day. I really put my back into it. And this is my approach with people too. If you're willing to put your back into it, I can sponsor you. There are lots of gentle people out there. If you need a gentle process, go and find someone that managed to get and stay sober using a gentle process. But I'm not that person. I tried soft and gentle with myself, did not work. I kept finding myself drunk and arrested, right? It was only when I fully gave myself to all three sides of the program that I stopped relapsing. So that's what I offer. So I give people a package deal. I write everything down. Everything I ask people to do, I write it down, because people are unable to write things down when you tell them. You need to know this. Even if they are a merchant banker or a teacher or an academic, especially academics, they don't know how to write things down accurately that you have just said. They will hear something completely different. Put all instructions in writing. I can't tell you how many arguments this will save. I didn't understand what you wanted me to do. I forgot, all of that sort of stuff. Bullshit. Just write it down, send it to them. I give people a full package deal of steps 10, 11, and 12 from day one. How can they do step 12 if they haven't had a spiritual awakening? They can show concern for other people in recovery. Let's say they're a week sober, they can help people who are 1 day sober because they've got really recent relevant experience of being 1 day sober, right? To give people a daily program. I know there are people that wait until they've done step 9 before they even start steps 10, 11, and 12. If I, at 28 and whatever, however many months sober, 28 years, 11 months sober, if I need to ask God for direction in the morning in order not to royally fuck up the day, then I think they're going to need that too. So I wouldn't be fine if I didn't ask my higher power and get direction, but they're going to be fine. That makes no sense. Now, obviously, you don't want them communing with, whatever spirits there are on the astral plane. It needs to be really practical. God, what do you want me to do today? Take your daily plan, run it past a grown-up. Do your review at the end of the day, run it past 2 grown-ups. If you get confused or distracted during the day, call a grown-up. It's great to have a higher power. It's even better to have some friends and some common sense. If you're new, you probably don't have any common sense, so you better have some good friends. And pray as well. So I give people a package deal, which basically takes them from first thing in the morning till last thing at night. So there is no excuse. But as soon as your eyes crack open in the morning, God, please direct my thinking. Last thing at night is spiritual reading until you fall asleep. If you read enough spiritual reading, eventually you'll fall asleep because it's so boring. Everything in between is catered for by the plan for the day. And so when the slip happens, because they're going to slip, a few don't, but most people are going to have a slip at some point. You can say, at which point did you deviate from the plan for the day? This is why we need plans for the day. If it's left to, oh, well, I shall just decide what to do by seeing how I feel in the moment, disaster. My first sponsor, Doug, said, the biggest disaster for an alcoholic is unstructured free time. So don't allow yourself any until your marbles have been restored on completion of step 9. You don't get all of your marbles back. You just get enough to play with for the time being. But until then, you need to be shackled into the system. But that sounds dictatorial. If you have a better idea for staying sober in the first year, have at it. If you find something that works better than that, great. I haven't. So there we go. And also, as Clancy says, I'm just getting swearier and swearier. All the spots, so there's no such thing as a dictator sponsor, because all the sponsor has to say is, well, fuck you then. And the dictatorship is over. That's the end of it. And then you can go and get, Soppy Susie or Soppy Sally to sponsor you instead. No offense to any actual Susies or Sallys. I'm sure you're strong AAs. But you know what I mean? If people want a different approach, there are so many people. There are so many ways of doing it. Go and try. If you don't want this, go and try something else. So I give people a really strong system. I've tried lots of things over the years. So what I do now is what I find works best with the largest number of people. So what else apart from the daily program? A shed load of meetings. Now, because of Zoom, there's no excuse not to go to a couple of meetings a day. On your lunch break at work, you can dial into one for that. You can do 5 meetings a week without breaking a sweat. And that's aside from all the face-to-face meetings. There's absolutely no excuse anymore not to be embedded in lots and lots of meetings. But it's the step work, which is really the important thing. So I've got all the instructions written down. I send people one instruction at a time. They complete the instruction and they call me. They call me as soon as the instruction is completed. If they haven't completed it by the next morning, they report in on what they have done by then. So I find the daily check-in, I get people to check in by 10 a.m. daily. If they're in a different time zone, it might be 6 p.m. I've got currently a couple of people in the 6 p.m. time zone, and the rest are in the 10 a.m. time zone. They have to check in by 10 a.m. If they're really genuinely obstructed by something, they can send a text explaining why. What this does is, you see, most people have terrible resistance to the process because it involves challenging every single belief, thinking pattern, and behavior pattern. And all of those constitute, as far as the person is concerned, their identity. So if they let go of that, they're letting go of who they are. So huge resistance. If you're talking to them daily, you have a chance of catching it before they spin off into the stratosphere and start calling you drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning. At least if a slip is on its way, they will have been warned on several occasions that it is on its way. There are no sudden slips with this system. It doesn't happen because you've got daily contact. You can see what's going on. You can hear in the voice what's going on. 1 minute they're enthusiastic, a couple of days later, the sighing starts. Have you ever been on the phone to a sponsee and you tell them something and and I listen out very carefully. I say, hey, you just sighed. What were you trying to communicate to me by sighing at that point? Was it dissatisfaction? I bring it all out into the open. We discuss it. And then you find out what's really going on. Very useful. So listen, don't just listen to what people are saying, listen to how they're saying it. There was one person once that used to do these funny little pauses when they didn't like what I said. There was a long pause where they held their breath. And then we discussed that. Once we discussed it, the behavior stopped. Very interesting. It was all a way of subtly signaling they did not like what I just said. If you don't like it, say, I don't like that. And then we can have an adult conversation about it. So this has got to work on the basis of openness. I don't hold back, and I don't want them to hold back either. If you want to say something, say it, have it out. I don't work up to being upfront and direct with people. They're going to find out eventually, so you might as well tell them at the beginning. If you're like me, if you're a kind of upfront person, Otherwise, you can rightly be accused of bait and switch. So don't be all cuddly and then turn into, step Nazi in 6 months' time. You give them the deal to start with. And to that end, I have something which I sort of jokingly refer to as the onboarding pack, just like when someone joins a sort of corporate organization. And one of them is this. I make it very clear to people. A lot of people have authority problem. They have problems with authority figures. They had problems with their parents. I did. I had problems with teachers. I had problems with the notion of a higher power. I've had problems with the laws of physics. I had a very stubborn resentment against Newton's second law of thermodynamics for a couple of years. I got over it. But I have trouble with authority. I don't like a cupboard door that won't shut properly because it is pulling rank on me. So, what is sponsorship? It's every authority nightmare you've ever had all rolled up into one person. So you're going to make sure that it's clear what we're here for. We're not here for a historical reenactment of the relationship with your parents. We're here to get business done. We're here to go through the steps and I'm going to show you how I apply the steps to practical situations. If you have a practical situation, I'll tell you how I've applied the steps, the traditions, and the concepts to that situation. What you do with the advice is up to you, but this is what I would do. I list the things that I'm not, just to make it really clear at the beginning. And here's my list. A sponsor is not an emergency or blue light service, a taxi, a doctor, a psychiatrist, a therapist, an analyst, a nutritionist, a friend, a housing service, an employment agency, a problem solver, a troubleshooter, an untangler of knots, a soothsayer, an oracle, a judge, a moral arbiter, a citizens advice bureau, a bank, a parent, a power source, a life coach, a motivational coach, or a search engine. We're here to transact business. I'm going to be as friendly as my temperament permits. But we're not. I remember phoning, I love this particular story. Poor old Brian, he doesn't come out of this story very well, but I don't think he minds. When I was about 13, 14 years sober, I phoned up my sponsor, Brian, and said, hey, could we go for a coffee sometime? I just think it'd be nice to hang out and have a coffee. And he said, we're not friends, don't you? I did not. I had not clicked what the nature of the relationship was. And I've been sponsored by all sorts of different people. And all of them at some point have used the same phrase. Very different personalities have used the same phrase. Business is business. We're not here for anything except as Hanson would say, sticking to the knitting, sticking to the nitty-gritty of what we're here for. In particular, friendship, don't do it. There are very, very occasional exceptions where it works, exceptional circumstances. But even then, I had someone who was very successfully a friend and sponsee for a while. But frankly, when push came to shove, a very difficult situation arose in his life. I immediately kicked him upstairs to be sponsored by my own sponsor, which he was very happy with, and things have worked out very well. At the slightest sign of trouble, they need to be kicked out of the friendship or kicked out of the sponsorship. Sometimes they need you more as a friend more than they need you as a sponsor. Sometimes the friendship is very important. So friendship is not a bad thing. Sometimes you might be the only person that they can be friends with right now, but they could be sponsored by any Tom, Dick, or Harry. So sponsorship doesn't always pull rank. You line up the two options, pick one. What else do we cover in the onboarding process? I let people know right at the beginning that they are going to experience resistance. So when it comes up, they're not blindsided by it. And what I alert people to is how human beings react to being challenged. And it's usually one of the following responses. Now, if you're a sponsor, listen out for this, because these are signs of resistance on the part of the sponsee. Attack, defense, deflection, denial, excuse, explanation, evasion, and justification. When you hear people saying things like, I just really want to make clear, I need you to know that. I just want to say, all these, they're subtle, but what they mean is, I don't like what you just said. You need to adjust your attitude, oh sponsor of mine, and you're going to use my material to do it. I listen very carefully. You can hit the timbre of the voice. The little yes, but machine is one that you get. Yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. And I respond to, if I hear the word but, I say what Jim W. says, which is, if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. And I keep saying that until the word but disappears. I watch out for the 4 R's: reaction, resistance, rejection, and reproach. If I encounter reaction, resistance, rejection, reproach, I press the pause button and say, hey, I'm observing which one of those it is. I'm observing some resistance here. I'm observing that what I've heard is that you just rejected what I've said. Let's come back tomorrow. If you want to come back and carry on discussing this, come back with a different attitude. If not, that's fine. I wish you well. See you around. But I'm not going to proceed. I'm not going to fight you. If it's really bad, there are exercises I can give people. Sometimes, you know what, a lot of people are really good at admitting that they're being resistant when it's called out in a just an ordinary business-like matter-of-fact way. Hey, a bit of resistance going on here, matey. I've got little worksheets I give people on how to work through resistance, how to work through unwillingness, how the ego will make you push back against things in ways that you don't even notice are operative. And often that works very, very well. People do get past the resistance, but what they'll often need to do is work through that with their little friends in AA. Do not work through the resistance with the person that you're resisting. It doesn't work. And I know because I've tried it. I occasionally make mistakes and try it again. It's never worked. You get them to work through it with someone else, make up their mind. I'll tell you the reason why. It's just a guess, but I think it's correct. When I'm more enthusiastic about their recovery than they are, we have a real problem. Because now part of them wants to get well, part of them doesn't. If you take the side of the part that wants to get well, you're now part of their internal conflict. And imagine a boxing ring, blue corner, red corner. If you take the blue corner of wanting to get well, and they notice that, they will automatically side with their ego, with the part of them that doesn't want to get well, in trying to convince them you're pushing them further into the arms of their ego. If you withdraw from the battle, the conflict necessarily remains inside them. And then they have to pick a side, and then they're much more likely to pick the side of their own best interests. It's very interesting. That's why I withdraw. Sometimes I do a timeout of 24 hours, 48 hours, 1 week, or 2 weeks. I do this when people don't call in. It's because there's basically a fundamental willingness problem. Now, people will always come to you with 10,000 excuses as to why that they couldn't. You know, the bus was late, I was called by work, the cat was sick, the dog was sick, my wife was complaining. There are 1,000 reasons why, but the fact is, when I need to make a phone call, I find a way to make that phone call. If I really can't make the phone call, I find a way to send a text. I do it under the table where no one can see. Do you know what I mean? If you really want to, you can do it. And I suggest to people they use the same ingenuity, resourcefulness, and willfulness that they were apt to display when trying to contact their dealer. Have you ever known someone that, like, if the first off license is shut, do you just go home? Oh, I'm not going to drink today. No, off license was shut. When they call and don't leave a message, whatever your system is, I have the system call, text for call back if you don't get through. What people will want to do is call so that they can say to themselves they've tried, but they will do everything to avoid actually getting through. So what I tell people is your job is not just to dial the number by 10 o'clock. Your job is to ensure that the conversation is adequately completed by 10 o'clock, which means you have to be prepared maybe to call several times, to leave a message, to make sure your line remains free so you can be called back. And when you're called back, you have your pen, you have your piece of paper, you have your big book, you have your step work, you are somewhere quiet or somewhere quiet enough. You've turned the incoming calls off so your boss can't call. Do you know what I mean? All a person has to do is show the same willingness that I showed when I needed a drink. That's it. We're not asking for any more. And the fact is, you have to be pretty tough to get through alcoholism. You have to be pretty resourceful. You have to have some ingenuity. You have to have some staying power. You have to have all of these skills to get through. Deploy those skills now. To sum up on the resistance, you want to watch out for Jedi mind tricks. Now, it's a little Star Wars reference. Not everyone gets Star Wars. Jedi, J-E-D-I, justification, explanation, defense, and intentions. I didn't do it because. I couldn't do it because. I intended to do it. I now intend to do it. Listen out for those. And also, I have to listen out for those in myself with other people. When I go into justification, explanation, defense, or intentions, I ask myself, did anyone ask me to justify myself, explain myself, defend myself, or express my intentions? If not, I'm trying to manipulate the person. Almost without exception, my sponsees, the people I've tried to sponsor over the years, are even the most resistant ones, are less resistant and less rude and less generally awful than I was in my first 10, 15 years. This is how I'm able to sponsor people, is because I've been that bad and way worse. What else do we need to know? Let me just have a look at my notes. Problem solving. One of the things that people will do, people are broken in different ways. One way in which people are commonly broken is they do everything themselves and they call their sponsor once a year and that's it. Other people, the slightest thing happens, they pick up the situation, they carry it to their phone, they launch the situation down the phone line. Now it's yours to solve. What you want to strike for is some middle ground where people come to you with stuff, but they process the situation they want input on as best they can, given their knowledge, their experience, their progress through the steps, their resources, their reading of the literature, their quiet contemplation of the situation, so that you don't have to do all of their thinking for them. You can tell when people are trying to put onto your plate as a sponsor something they should be thinking through for themselves, because your body will tense up, because you feel that you're taking it. At some point, you know you're being taken advantage of. Now, people aren't taking advantage of you to be mean. It's just they're badly trained, as I was. So what I've had to learn to do with people is to give them the tools to work through situations themselves. And then my job as a sponsor is to listen to the best they can come up with, of the analysis of the situation, how to apply the program to it, and then I can take them further and spot gaps. If I had to do all the preliminary processing, I'd spend my whole life on the phone. I can't do that. And also, it doesn't do them any good. People need to grow the F up. And one last thing before we go on to questions and answers. The AA program starts on page 63 of the big book. Everything up to then is chit chat about steps 1, 2, and the preparation for step 3. The business of the program starts on page 63. Within 6 pages, so 6 pages into the program, it's given you a full and adequate answer to all resentment, all emotional upset, fear, your own bad behavior, and problems. It gives you a problem-solving matrix on page 69. You take the sex inventory questions and the solution of the sane and sound ideal and how to grow towards it, and you apply it to the problems. Can't tell you how many people I've come across who are 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years sober that say things like, I'm full of resentment, I'm full of fear, I've been through the steps many times. I'm like, no, you haven't. You may have done some mechanics, but if you're not aware and are not on a daily basis practicing the entry-level solutions in the first 6 pages of the program, I don't know what you've been doing, but it hasn't been the program. There's a collective failure to, in my opinion, a collective failure to grow up and dignifying of resentment and fear as kind of natural, inevitable states that alcoholics have to kind of somehow learn to manage and live in. I don't believe that anymore. My attitude with fear, my sponsor explained this to me. You may need to, I don't know if you'll want to write this down, it may be helpful. He explained very carefully, fuck fear. You've got God on your side now. And if you've got a resentment, go to the top of page 67. How can I be helpful? God save me from being angry. This is a sick person, thy will be done. And you say it and you say it and you say it until you feel love for the person. Now, it doesn't mean you become a sap, doesn't mean you become a doormat, doesn't mean you become all like flowers around the door, but it means you have an attitude of love. And what is love? I'll finish on this and then we'll go on to some questions if there are any. Love is not getting naked with people. Love is not attraction. Love is not entanglement or enmeshment or sentiment or platitudes or soppiness or sappiness or Valentine's Day or gooiness or pity or sympathy or any of those things. It's active concern for another human being's welfare. And the measure of a person's love, in my belief, is how much of their day they devote to actively working for the welfare of other people. That is love. It may be sugar-coated or it might not be. Often what I believe is love does not feel like love at the time and does not look like love. But when you look back, you think, my God, that helped me more than anything in my life. Most of the things which have helped me more than anything in recovery, they felt like hell at the time. But those people were so concerned with my welfare, they risked losing my approval of them and indeed the relationship with them to deliver what they thought I might need to hear in order not to die of alcoholism. That is love, and that's what sponsorship is about. So don't get into it if you want to make friends or get approval, because you won't. You'll get a reputation. But if you care more about helping people than your reputation, by all means, sponsor away. So Patrick, I'll open it up to.